The brass nameplate on the heavy oak door read Whitmore and Associates. And I stared at it for what felt like an eternity before my trembling hand finally turned the handle. 26 years. 26 years since I'd last seen any of them, and now here I was, walking into the lion's den because a certified letter had found me in my cramped Chicago apartment, somehow tracking me through 6 different addresses and 3 name changes. The conference room fell silent the moment I stepped inside. The expensive Persian rug beneath my second-hand boots seemed to swallow every sound except the thundering of my own heartbeat. Their faces, God, I'll never forget their faces. Pure shock, like they were staring at someone who had crawled out of their own grave. My stepmother, Victoria, sat rigid in her designer suit, her perfectly manicured fingers frozen halfway to her throat. She'd aged. But money had been kind to her subtle nips and tucks that kept her looking like the polished socialite who'd swept my father off his feet when I was 14. Beside her, my half-brother Dylan looked like he'd seen a ghost, his corporate lawyer exterior cracking just enough to show the spoiled boy I remembered. And Sophia, little Sophia, who used to follow me around like a lost puppy, she was a grown woman now, elegant and composed, but her eyes were wide with something that looked almost like relief. The lawyer, a distinguished man with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, looked up from his leather portfolio. His nameplate read Charles Whitmore, and he was clearly trying to process what he was seeing. "Excuse me, miss, but this is a private proceeding. I'm afraid I'll have to ask you." "To Ravenna," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Ravenna Blackwood. Though you might have me listed under my birth name Ravenna Claire Ashford." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Victoria's face went ashen beneath her foundation, and Dylan actually pushed back from the table like I might be contagious. "That's impossible," Victoria whispered, her voice barely audible. "Ravenna is. She's been gone for decades. She ran away. She could be dead for all we know." Dead? How convenient that would have been for all of them. How much easier their perfect little family portrait would have looked without the angry, grieving teenager who reminded them all that Robert Ashford had loved someone else first. Someone else deeper. I reached into my worn leather bag and pulled out the envelope that had started this whole journey. The certified letter from Whitmore and Associates that had somehow found me despite all my efforts to disappear. "Ravenna Claire Ashford," I repeated, stepping closer to the conference table. "Born October 22, 1977. Daughter of Robert James Ashford and Isabella Marie Ashford, deceased." My voice caught on my mother's name, the way it always did. Even after all these years, saying it out loud felt like pressing on a bruise that had never quite healed. Mr. Whitmore fumbled through his papers, his professional composure clearly shaken. Miss Ashford. This is highly irregular. According to our records, according to the family's statements from years ago, we were led to believe that you were. That is to say what?" I asked, and I could hear 26 years of hurt sharpening my words. "That I was dead. That I didn't exist. That it would be tidier for everyone if they just pretended the first 14 years of my life never happened." Sophia spoke for the first time, her voice soft and uncertain. "Raven, is it really you?" She was the only one who had ever called me that, back when she was 7 and couldn't quite pronounce my full name, back when she would sneak into my room at night because she was scared of thunderstorms. Before everything fell apart, I looked at her, this beautiful woman who was supposed to be my sister, but felt like a stranger, and felt something crack open in my chest. "Yeah, Sophie, it's really me." "This is absurd," Dylan interjected, his voice carrying that same entitled tone that had made my teenage years hell. "Even if this woman is who she claims to be, she abandoned this family. She made her choice when she walked out. Walked out. As if I'd had a choice. As if being 14 and grief-stricken and told daily that I was making things difficult for everyone had given me any real options." "DNA test," Victoria said suddenly, her voice sharp and cold. "We demand a DNA test before any of this proceeds. Anyone could claim to be Ravenna. It's been 26 years. I laughed, and the sound came out bitter and raw. "Fine by me. But you might want to ask yourself why your husband left me something in his will if I was really as forgotten as you all pretended I was." Mr. Whitmore cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. "Perhaps we should proceed with the reading. The will is quite specific about Miss Ashford's inheritance." I took the empty chair at the opposite end of the table, as far from them as I could get while still being in the same room. The leather was cold against my back, and I tried not to think about the last time I'd been in a room this expensive, this formal. It had been in my father's study, the night before I left. The night he'd looked me in the eyes and told me that if I couldn't adjust to the new family dynamic, maybe it would be better for everyone if I found somewhere else to live. I was 14 years old. Mr. Whitmore began reading in that formal, detached tone that lawyers use to distance themselves from the human drama unfolding in their conference rooms. Victoria got the house, this sprawling estate that had never felt like home to me anyway. Dylan inherited the business empire, all those companies and investments that had bought him everything except a soul. Sophia received the art collection and various financial accounts, all the things I'd expected, all the wealth I'd grown up surrounded by but had never really belonged to, especially after my mother died and I became the inconvenient reminder of Robert Ashford's first life. Then, Mr. Whitmore paused, looked directly at me, and everything changed. To my daughter Ravenna Claire Ashford, whom I failed in ways that will haunt me until my dying breath, I leave what matters most, the house at 847 Willowbrook Lane, the house where she was born, where her mother and I were happiest, and where she should have been allowed to heal after Isabella's death. The room went dead silent. I knew that address. It was our old house. The house we'd lived in when it was just the three of us, me, Mom, and Dad. The house with the tire swing and the oak tree and the kitchen where Mom taught me to make her famous chocolate chip cookies. The house we'd had to sell when the medical bills got too overwhelming, before Dad married Victoria and moved us all into her cold, pristine mansion. Furthermore, Mr. Whitmore continued, I leave Ravenna the contents of Safety Deposit Box 1247 at First National Bank, which contains her mother's jewelry, family photographs, and personal letters, as well as a trust fund established in her name, untouched and earning interest for 26 years, currently valued at $2.3 million. Felt like I couldn't breathe. $2 million, money he'd been setting aside for me all these years, even while they were all pretending I didn't exist. Victoria's voice cut through my shock like broken glass. This is insane. Robert never mentioned any of this. He never talked about that house or ... or her. This will has to be contested. This woman could be anyone. But Sophia was staring at me with tears in her eyes, and I could see recognition dawning on her face like sunrise. The birthmark, she whispered. Raven had a crescent-shaped birthmark on her wrist. Mom, look at her wrist. I pulled back the sleeve of my jacket without thinking, revealing the small, moon-shaped mark on my left wrist that I'd always been self-conscious about as a kid. Victoria had seen it 1,000 times. She'd been there when I'd scraped that same wrist falling off my bike. Had bandaged it herself back when she was still trying to be a mother to me. Her face crumpled, and for just a moment, she looked like the woman who used to read me bedtime stories and braid my hair before school. Before grief and guilt and jealousy poisoned everything between us. There's more, Mr. Whitmore said gently. Your father left you a personal letter, Miss Ashford, and instructions for accessing a storage unit that contains, well, according to the inventory, it contains your childhood belongings. Everything from your old bedroom. My hands were shaking as I took the sealed envelope he offered me. My name was written on it in my father's familiar handwriting, the same handwriting that had signed my report cards and birthday cards and the permission slip for my first school dance. Before everything went wrong, I didn't open it there. Some things are too private, too sacred, to share with people who spent 26 years acting like you never mattered. Dylan was still sputtering, his face red with indignation. Even if she is Ravenna, she doesn't deserve any of this. She left us. She chose to disappear. I stood up slowly, feeling taller and stronger than I had in years. I was 14, I said, and my voice carried across that room like a bell. I was 14 years old, and I had just lost my mother to cancer. Instead of getting help and support, and love, I got told daily that I was making things hard for everyone. I was told that my grief was inconvenient, that my anger was inappropriate, that my very existence was a problem that needed to be solved. I walked around the table until I was standing directly across from Victoria. She looked smaller now, more fragile, but I could still see the calculating woman who had made my teenage years a living hell. I didn't abandon anyone, I continued. I was abandoned. I was a child who needed her family, and instead of stepping up, you all decided it would be easier to let me go. Victoria's voice was barely a whisper. You were so angry all the time. So difficult. Nothing I did was right. You were trying to replace my dead mother, I said, and the words came out sharper than I intended. You wanted me to forget her, to act grateful for your presence. To pretend that your family was better than the one I'd lost. You wanted me to erase myself, to make room for your version of who I should be. I turned to Dylan, who was still glaring at me with unconcealed resentment. And you? You resented me from day one because I was living proof that your mother wasn't Dad's first choice. You made sure I knew I didn't belong, that I was the outsider, the intruder in your perfect family. Then I looked at Sophia, sweet Sophia, who had been caught in the middle of all this adult dysfunction. You were the only one who ever made me feel like family. The only one who cried when I left. Tears were streaming down her face now. I looked for you, she whispered. For years, I looked for you. I hired private investigators when I turned 18. I never stopped hoping you'd come back. Something in my chest loosened at those words. All these years, I'd thought I was completely forgotten, completely erased. But Sophia had remembered. Sophia had looked for me. Mr. Whitmore cleared his throat. There's one final provision in the will, Miss Ashford. Your father established a charitable foundation in your mother's name, the Isabella Ashford Foundation for Cancer Research. He's named you as the director, with full authority over its operations and its $50 million endowment. The room spun around me. $50 million for cancer research, in my mother's name. My father hadn't just remembered me, remembered why I'd been so angry, why I'd fought so hard against their attempts to make me forget her. He knew, I said, more to myself than to anyone else. He knew I'd never forgive him for trying to erase her memory. I looked around the room one last time, at these people who had shaped so much of my pain and my strength. Dylan still looked furious. Victoria seemed to have aged 10 years in the past hour, and Sophia was openly crying. The DNA test, I said to Dylan as I headed toward the door. Set it up if it makes you feel better. But we both know what it's going to prove. The question you need to ask yourself is whether you can live with the man you've become, knowing how you treated a grieving child. I walked out of that conference room with my father's letter pressed against my heart, and keys to a house I thought I'd never see again in my pocket. For the first time in 26 years, I felt like I was walking toward something instead of running away from it. The hallway seemed brighter. My reflection in the elevator doors showed a woman who looked like she finally belonged somewhere, and I realized that I hadn't just come here to collect an inheritance. I'd come to reclaim my story, to prove that some things love memory. The bond between a parent and child survive even when they're buried under years of hurt and silence. I am Ravenna Claire Ashford. I have always been Ravenna Claire Ashford. And I never needed anyone's permission to exist, to matter, to be worthy of love and remembrance. The truth doesn't always come wrapped in legal documents and family acceptance. Sometimes it lives in the courage to show up, to face the people who hurt you, and to claim what was always rightfully yours. Sometimes it lives in the strength to forgive without forgetting, to heal without erasing the scars that made you who you are. My mother used to tell me that we are all made of stars, ancient light that traveled across impossible distances to shine in this moment. I forgot that for a long time. Let other people convince me I was darkness instead of light. But standing in that elevator, holding my father's final words and my mother's legacy, I remembered. I remembered that I am made of stars, and stars don't need permission to shine. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss any of our emotional stories. Leave a comment below. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to fight to prove who you really are? Share your experience with us. And if you know someone who needs to hear a story about courage and new beginnings, please share this video with them. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.